I've been with Bolt for only a year. In a good week, like month end, I'll earn around 5,000. Hey, I can buy my children bread. I can take them out daily, you know. The strategies that I now use, you can wake up early and take a break of maybe an hour and then start again when it's busy time and work till late. You drive with people that you don't know. Welcome them in your car. That's the first thing that I do. And from that, that's where you take it and they feel comfortable and happy.
A warm welcome to everyone that has joined us today in the room and online. My name is Nchimunya Gquma. I am the PR Manager for Africa at Bolt. And thank you so much for taking time to join us today. We do have our CEO in country, Markus Villig, joining us. And this conversation is basically just to take you through around what we as a brand we stand for, what we believe in and our mission. And hopefully you will walk away feeling a little bit better, more assured as to what we offer as a brand and as a business and what we essentially believe in. So please, I ask that you turn off your phones on silent if you are expecting an important call, and if you can, just completely switch it off. And yes, please do engage us, and we will be taking questions towards the end of the panel discussion, but please do sit tight. And yeah, let the panel discussion begin. Thank you so much.
Right, well, thank you very much, Nchimunya, for that reminder to switch off our phones, because even mine wasn't switched off. So let me put it on airplane mode. I'd just like to say good morning to everybody. And of course, this also goes out to the people that are still scrambling to find Valentine's Day gifts. Yes, it is tomorrow. So after this panel discussion, you better get cracking. So I'd like to welcome all our audience that joins us here physically and also our online audience. Of course, we do welcome you, and we do want this panel to be very interactive, so I'll update you on how you can interact with us and this conversation. So when I was approached to moderate this panel, I was very excited because riding on e-hailing services is what I do every day. Even this morning, I took a Bolt, and I was actually asking the Bolt driver to help me with some of the questions that I'll be asking the panelists today. So some very, very difficult questions coming, coming your way. Of course, I do also hope that discounts will be coming my way from now on, because now I know people. Wink, wink. But yeah, thank you very much, everyone, for joining us. Of course, this conversation is all about commuting at the touch of a button. And of course, e-hailing services have really changed the way we commute and also how we look at the public transport system. So we will be drilling into some of the big challenges and also opportunities, because those go hand in hand. So some of the big challenges and opportunities and dynamics when it comes to safety, reliability, and also pricing. We all know we are suffering high inflation, high interest rates. So we want our lives to be better, but also at a cheaper price point. So just before I introduce my panel members, I'd like to just some housekeeping. So for those who are physically here with us, if you do need the bathroom, as you go out, so there by the entrance, you go out, and the women's bathroom is on your immediate right, and the male bathroom is just past the staircase. So as I said, we do want this to be interactive, so we will be having a question and answer session after the panel discussion. So I think we have about 30 to 45 minutes of discussions, and then we'll be going into the question and answer session for about 15 minutes. And for our online audience as well, thank you very much for joining us. And there is a chat room, I think, on the side of the screen there. You'll see a chat room, so you can interact with us and ask us questions. But thank you very much, everybody, for joining us. And I'd like to introduce my panel. So on my right, we have Markus Villig. He is the global CEO and founder of Bolt. Founded the company at the age of 19. So the company's been around now for about almost a decade. So just some highlights. So he was frustrated by the outdated taxi industry. He built the first version of the ride-hailing software himself. He launched Bolt with 50 drivers he had personally acquired on the streets of Tallinn. Did I say that right?
Absolutely.
All right. Youngest founder of a billion-dollar company in Europe, and has been featured as the youngest tech CEO in Forbes Europe 30 under 30 list. So some of his hobbies when he's not working, enjoys reading, hiking, and playing chess. And he does not have a driver's license, which actually speaks to what you are doing here and what has brought us all here. And then here on my right end, we have Patrick, I guess more affectionately known as Paddy Partridge. So he's the vice president for Bolt. So just some highlights on him. Prior to this, he was the regional director for ride-hailing in Africa, and he joined Bolt in 2020. You are currently based in Nairobi, in Kenya. All right. And you've always worked with technology-driven businesses that have a profoundly positive impact on the developing markets in which they operate. So Paddy is responsible for leading the brand's growth into lucrative markets worldwide. And then on my left, we have Takura Malaba, the regional manager for South and East Africa at Bolt, joining Bolt in November 2021 as the country manager for ride-hailing in South Africa, where he was responsible for strategy and operations. And of course, he has years of experience working in African markets and a personal passion to drive growth and empowerment on the continent. And then we have Tinyiko on my left end there, Simbine, co-founder and CFO of GirlCode. So that's a registered NPO that was founded in 2014, aimed at empowering young women and girls through technology. The mission of GirlCode is to empower 10 million women and girls by 2030 by creating a network of women who are highly skilled in software development and leadership skills, who will contribute towards an inclusive and innovative technology industry. And lastly, but not least, forgive us if we are a little bit chummy with each other. We went to Rhodes University together, so this is kind of a Rhodes reunion for us. That's Nchimunya, Chipo, Hamukoma, head of funder relationships and strategic projects at Harambee. Thank you so much for your time and for joining us here. So, of course, to start off this conversation, I'd like to get an overview from you, Markus. Of course, you started this at the age of 19. Bolt's been around for about 10 years. And I'd like to know the journey that and the trends that you've seen in terms of technology developments in the space of e-hailing, with the development also of the customer and driver experience.
I'd say that the core experience in many ways, the vision has stayed the same, which is that it's quite magical when you open an app, you tap a button and the car arrives in a couple of minutes. So absolutely the core experience has been that for the last 10 years, and something we hope is going to continue for the next decades to come as well. But of course, everything that happens behind the scenes has changed massively.
Yeah.
So when I started, a 19-year-old kid going on the streets alone and trying to sign up taxi drivers is one thing. And now, of course, we have a very professional organization of more than 1,000 people across the globe that are working every day very hard to make sure that we find new drivers to the platform, we make sure they get good earnings, we make sure the platform is safe. Yeah. So of course, the technology has massively improved, the operations have improved. It's a very different organization now than what it was back then.
All right. So talking about how different the organization has been, of course, the e-hailing service, the commuting service is just one of the areas of focus for you. But Bolt is also commonly known as a super app, and I'd actually like to know, because we have to bring this to Africa as well, as much as it is considered as a super app outside of Africa, but in Africa, Paddy, how is the adoption of Bolt as a super app rather than just a standalone e-hailing service?
Sure. So, I mean, when we talk about Bolt being a super app, I mean, it's because we're combining a number of adjacent services into one single app. And if you look at the business as a whole, we have three sort of principal verticals. We have the e-hailing, we have the micromobility arm, which is essentially electric scooters, electric bikes. And within that broader sense, we also have car rentals as well. And then the third vertical is delivery. So we do food delivery, and we have what we call bulk market, which is grocery deliveries as well. And the idea with the first two verticals is that we can basically provide an affordable alternative to every use case you would have for owning a private vehicle. So shorter trips you can take on an electric scooter, slightly longer trips, or where you have baggage or several people, you can take on ride-hailing, and then even longer trips you can take on one of our car rentals.
Yeah.
Now, in our African markets, we have ride-hailing in 7 countries. Then we have food delivery, I think now in 4 countries, including here. But the rentals or the micromobility is yet to come to Africa, although we are exploring a number of areas of South Africa and Kenya potentially for micromobility.
Yeah, all right. Well, of course, we can't talk about commuting without talking about safety. So let's talk about that for both drivers and for consumers. We know the long-standing conflict between the metered taxi and even taxi drivers and e-hailing service drivers. It's something that really has been there for a while, and it doesn't seem that there's a lot of movement in terms of that, where now you get customers being inconvenienced by having to walk even 500 meters from the point of departure to actually get a Bolt car. But you also have tragic incidents that have been reported on social media of some of the rides not being safe enough, where things have happened with the drivers, and particularly women falling victim to that. So how are you approaching those issues, both from a driver safety point of view and consumer point of view, Takura?
Sure. I think given the context of the country that we operate in, safety is always a big topic and one that we must address. Because of this, safety is the #1 priority at Bolt. And what we've done beyond the industry standard criminal background checks is we've added additional features. One of them is BQS, which is a behavioral quality score system. What this does is that it provides drivers with real-time feedback or near real-time feedback on their quality and their service to riders based on rider feedback. We score drivers out of 100, and when that score drops below a certain threshold, the driver is blocked from the platform and forced to do a training related to that specific quality event that they need to improve. So that's one area. We've seen a lot of improvement since launching BQS early last year. We now know on our platform in Bolt South Africa, 90% of trips that are rated are actually 5 stars. So this has been a massive improvement for us on our side.
Okay.
From a tech product perspective, we have an SOS button that also activates 24/7 security team for any armed response or any medical services, such that if there are any emergencies on a trip. You can also share your trip details or your ETA with loved ones or family. This is also for riders and drivers via SMS or WhatsApp.
Yeah.
And we're also proud to announce that we're the only e-hailing company in Africa that has a women-only category. So what this means is that female riders can request trips from female drivers, ensuring that they're a lot more comfortable and a lot safer when they're taking trips. We are seeing a huge amount of demand on the female side from the ride perspective, and also that's resulting in us, attempting to add a lot more supply from a driver perspective. So that's fantastic, considering the economic situation and unemployment in South Africa, that we're able to provide earnings opportunities for the women in our country.
I hear you on that, and I actually have seen the women-only option. But I'd just like to know how you're approaching pricing, because, for example, Bolt Go is cheaper than the rest of the options, and actually the women-only option is on the same price level as Bolt X, which is slightly more expensive than Bolt Go. So how do you approach those pricing issues? Because some would argue that why should women be paying a premium to be safe? And especially considering the country that we live in, where women are at the bottom of the food chain in terms of economic security.
Yeah, so that's a good question. Initially, when we launched the category, we pegged it towards the base price. Reason being was that we saw that the women on our category drive the slightly bigger vehicles. So at that price point at go, it becomes slightly less profitable for them. And as I mentioned earlier, we're having challenges with getting more and more women onto the platform, actually. So we need to create an environment that's a lot more attractive for them. Over the last year, we have been considering adjusting our pricing strategy as the Go category increases. So this is something that we're definitely looking into.
All right. Well, Tinyiko, let's go to you. Of course, you're involved in women and young girls being taught how to basically solve for the problems that the continent faces through tech. And I'd like to know from you, I mean, what are the gaps here when it comes to technology and the inclusion of women in that space where women are actually creating some of these solutions that we want?
Okay, so some of the gaps include technology that isn't conducive for women to use, because there aren't enough women in the tech space to actually contribute towards the building of this technology.
Yeah.
So that's where problem number one starts. Problem number two is not having enough representation in the STEM field as a whole, or the tech sector. And that again, it makes women shy away from getting into that industry because, you don't feel comfortable. It's more of a boys' club. However, we as GirlCode are actively trying to get more and more girls and women into the space, and so that they can then grow into the space and become leaders in this place, in the space, so that the younger generations can come into the space and contribute towards the technology that is being built and being put out there.
Is the education there? Is it enough? Because I think if there's enough education to go around for young girls into the space, then it will stop being a boys' club.
Yes, so the education is there. The only thing is getting the awareness to the young girls, which is why we have some of the programs that we have, such as our 3-month online bootcamp, where we take unemployed IT graduates and we upskill them with various tech skills that include AWS as well as Python, and get them certified in these fields so that they become more employable. And we have also partnered with various tech companies, national as well as international tech companies, who then end up hiring these girls that we have then upskilled with the relevant skills that they are looking for in order for them to hire these young ladies.
Yeah. Chipo, I want to come to you because your organization, we're actually having a conversation earlier on that it's like a Tinder for employment, where you get in job seekers in contact with companies that are looking to hire them. So what trends have you seen, particularly in the tech space, when it comes to appetite from job seekers and also appetite from companies to hire them?
Awesome. I think I need to make a disclaimer about our Tinder option. The reason it's like Tinder is because we focus on geolocation and we geotag every single one of our applicants. So we have 4.5 million young people who are registered users of sayouth.mobi, with about 1 million active monthly users. So what we do as an organization is we connect young people using a data-free app to opportunities. So any young person anywhere across South Africa can just log onto the app and say, hey, this is who I am, these are where my skills are, and this is how, and then we'll say, cool, let's see what jobs are within a 2-taxi radius of where you live, and try to connect those young people to that, because transportation does form one of those huge cost barriers to young people. And so when it comes to tech jobs and when it comes to gig economy jobs, one of the challenges that we face in South Africa particularly is around this mindset issue. So for many young people, the kind of job they want is an office job with the suit, with the tie, with a very clear salary at the end of the day. And when you tell them, hey, there's actually lots of opportunities for you to hustle, lots of opportunities for you to have multiple income streams and earn money, people are like, no thank you. Their parents are also like, no thank you. So part of our job as an organization is like, how do we convince South Africans, young South Africans, that gig work can be dignified work, can be good work, can be meaningful income? And then also, how do we partner with organizations like Bolt to help it make that more true in more ways? So to help make their sort of like income trajectories a little bit more predictable, to support them in the safety aspects that they're having, especially, you know, from the driver's side as well, to say, this is a good, safe, reliable opportunity for you. Here's how you can make some meaningful projections. Here's how you can get to income. And so for us, on the gig economy side, that mindset barrier is a huge thing that we're facing.
And it's quite an interesting point that you raise, because you would think that with the advent and expansion of the gig economy, it would really open up the floodgates to employment. But then you look at the youth employment unemployment stats, it's quite staggering. And quite an interesting point that you make there, and that's the thing, because the gig economy is flexible, and you're also more in control of how much you charge. And how do you get, though, to a place, where do you start in terms of getting to a place where you do change that mindset, that actually gig economy jobs are serious things?
So, I mean, part of what we're doing, and it's actually with a partner who's in partnership with Bolt, is with an academy in the Western Cape called Green Riders. So they have electric bicycles, and they're trying to get more young South Africans into the delivery driver space. Because one of the challenges that we have is a lot of young South Africans don't see that as a viable opportunity. You've also got the problems with like licensing and how long it takes to get your license. And so what they've said is like, if we can get young people delivering in a 5-kilometer radius around where they are, food deliveries in their local communities, let's see what happens. And so these young people come in, they have about a 3-month course where they learn about like how to drive, they learn about like the different platforms that they can sign up for, they learn about what would make them a good delivery driver in a Bolt system, say for instance. So what are the things that they're allowed to do, what are the things that they're not allowed to do? You know, there's, I think from my understanding, there's some quite strict measures in terms of like, if you have a couple of no-shows or something, then you cease to become an effective driver. So young people learn about that beforehand, and they also learn, one of the things that we found that helps them stabilize their income is that like a big income stream for delivery drivers comes not only from like your actual cost of delivery, but from the tips. So young people are now learning about customer service.
Yes.
And when you have a young person who's trained to understand, okay, this is how I can optimize my usage on the platform effectively, this is also how I can increase my income through my customer service perspective, you have young people who within 4 to 5 months' time are now earning on average about 6,000 rand, on the higher side of the average in terms of like the more high performers, an average of like 12,000 rand, which is nearly 4 times our national minimum wage. So in South Africa, a 12,000 rand is real money. And so I think it's about those things of showing young people and helping young people to understand the benefits of gig work, and also equipping them through skilling to make the most of those opportunities.
Yeah, all right. Let's talk about e-hailing service switching. Because a lot of the e-hailing drivers are actually signed onto every single one of the e-hailing services. So I want to know from you, Markus, how you entice and attract drivers to actually use Bolt instead of the other ones.
We've actually had intense competition since we started 9 years ago, and we always welcome it. And we're very fine if customers check out multiple apps, if drivers drive for multiple apps. Ultimately, what we need to do is offer them the best product we can and hope that over time they will switch to us. And very clearly, that's happening across the world. So when we look at South Africa as well, we weren't the first ride-hailing company to launch here, but today we're by far the most popular one. So very clearly we see that we're offering something great that works for both drivers and the passengers.
Yeah.
But specifically zooming in, what do they care about? I mean, for drivers, generally it boils down to a couple of things. The most important usually is earnings. So I mean, they need to make an earning level that they are comfortable with. And the second thing is safety. So I mean, of course, it needs to be a job that they actually feel safe doing. And we made tremendous progress on both of those over the last 5 years. We've been investing significantly into how do we save the cost for the drivers with various discounts that we're having from the partners. We're investing heavily into our mapping. So how do we make sure that we do the most efficient routing and match the drivers most effectively with the pickup points. And of course, on the safety side, as already mentioned, there's a lot of initiatives going on there in terms of how are we actually detecting trips that might seem to have any anomalies there. How are we giving options for drivers to share their trips with other drivers so everybody would be aware of where they're moving and so on. So there's a lot of small things like that we're doing. There's not going to be a silver bullet though. I mean, crime can't be solved by one company. It's not going to be Bolt who takes care of everything. But of course, there's a lot of initiatives that we've already done and many more to come in the next couple of years.
Yeah. I actually want to ask Paddy, so in the Bolt that I was in today, the driver said because it was a car trip, and the driver actually said, do you mind if we cancel and then you give me cash because I need petrol to get to our destination? So I tell him that I can't, I've lost my card, so I can't even draw out money. And he actually said to me, I must ask you guys, why a customer or a driver, why can't they change between a cash and card option in the middle of the ride, or maybe just before the ride starts? Because as I mentioned, even they also go through cash crunches, and the example that I mentioned is one of them. So,
yeah, I think from cash to card, it's probably it's a fraud risk potentially, because we have to pre-authorize the card to check that they do actually have money on there.
Yeah.
From card to cash, I'm not sure if that is something we're working on, but I think more broadly, I mean, to address this problem. So I mean, I think Bolt was the first of the big ride-hailing players to make cash an option as a payment channel, and I think that significantly opened up the markets in Africa where we're present. And we know that a lot of our drivers, they would rather get cash trips because, as you say, quite often after a trip they want to go and refuel, or they have maintenance costs and so forth. But we know a lot of users want to be able to use card. And so one of the features we rolled out, I think last year, was this early cash out functionality. And so we made sure to price it really affordably for drivers, and we pay out, I think, typically within around up to 15 minutes, basically. So essentially, drivers, if they have earnings that they're owed by Bolt, they can cash out into a mobile wallet and get the cash that way. And hopefully that mitigates a lot of the concerns on the driver side with regards to card trips.
All right. Earlier on, we were talking about how drivers also need to make the most of earnings as well. And there was another suggestion that came through from my Bolt driver this morning, because he says that, you know, he comes from far and he was going to Sandton, and he's like, he dropped off one person in Sandton, and he's like, would it not make sense for a ride-sharing option where, I don't know, you kind of have, because also there's also the scheduling of, I think, are you guys working on a scheduling of, yes, so maybe with ride scheduling, they get to pick on, you know, let me take 3 people to Sandton from wherever, and maybe you can get an option there, because I was also asking him about the pricing point, because I'm like, you can't want the 3 of us to pay 100 Rand each, whereas now I have less space and less privacy. And just also from a safety perspective, because also how can you trust the other people that are in the ride with you? But he said, you know what? If you introduce that option, maybe you could have an option of negotiating the price, because obviously now you have less privacy. I don't know, is that something that you're looking at, a kind of a ride-sharing option?
So I think you nicely highlighted some of the challenges with ride sharing, specifically in the context of South Africa, right? One of the challenges is safety, one of them. Secondly, when you look at it from a pooling perspective, what we've seen from internationally is that specific value proposition doesn't really sit well between our sort of premium categories and our cheaper categories. Where we have launched it hasn't gained enough traction because there's just not that unique value proposition or enough people looking to take on the transport services. Around ride scheduling, yes, we actually are launching ride scheduling. We should be rolling it out in March this year. It's currently being trialed around 20% of our user base. From a sort of back-to-back ordering, we do have a lot of back-to-back orders actually, just due to the natural demand on the platform. And we have features such as order accept. So when a driver is dropping off a client, they can literally get another order accept and drop somebody else off. So we don't really see a lot of idle time. Where we do see the idle time, it's drivers opting not to take a trip, or they're working on another platform.
All right. Tinyiko, back to the issue of inclusion. Would you say that tech is one of the more inclusive sectors, or maybe because of that problem of it's still kind of being seen as a boys' club, although it is progressing, that it's not?
Yeah, it's definitely improved drastically over the years, and it is getting better. But it's still quite exclusive to men. But we've seen a lot of corporates, taking the initiative to making it more inclusive for women and having more female-focused initiatives and upskilling the women within the organizations, as well as, women in schools and other organizations. So it is definitely a very big shift. And it's quite exciting to see.
Would you say that there is enough support, though, from both the private and the public sector?
From the private sector, yes. As I mentioned, there's quite a few corporates have seen this gap and are actively trying to close this gap. However, from a public sector, I can't really speak to that, as we haven't had a lot of partnerships with the public sector. But from a private sector, definitely. We've partnered with, a couple of international organizations, as well as national organizations who are actively trying to close this very big gender gap, whilst also closing the very huge youth unemployment rate that we currently face in South Africa.
Yeah. Talking about partnerships, Chipo, what are the key considerations that Harambee makes when they are choosing the partners, the companies that they partner with? Because also the big trend now is whatever company that you're looking to work with, it needs to fulfill the ESG principles, and particularly the S in ESG. So what have you seen there?
I mean, I think, so by the function of where we are as an organization and what our platform is currently doing, partnerships are the bedrock of how we get opportunities to young people, because there's no way that we as an organization could personally employ 1 million people. And so we depend on partnerships in terms of finding the opportunities for young people and connecting young people to those opportunities. I think in terms of how the selection around that happens, it is, I guess, as we are in the month of love, it is very much in the same way as one would look at a relationship. So where does the alignment come in from the organizations? Do you have the same kind of core value systems? Are you hoping to move in the same direction? Because I think, particularly for us, our duty of care and our level of stewardship is towards the young people who are on our platform. They're our biggest clients, they're our biggest customer. And so we need to make sure that if we're going to be partnering with organizations, if we're going to be showing opportunities on SA Youth, these need to be ethical companies who are making, sustainable choices in the way that they're hiring, and are making equitable choices in the way that they're hiring for young people. So that's something that we really look towards, is to understand what are the values of organizations in that process. And also when we find that there's a mismatch, saying, if we find that there's an organization that perhaps is violating our terms of service in the way that they hire young people, saying, unfortunately, you can no longer put your job opportunities on the app, because we want young people to get good quality opportunities. That's something that we're incredibly passionate about.
Yeah. I want to know from you, Markus, because we know that in some European countries, regulations are quite strict on e-hailing companies. Do you think that regulation in Africa is mature enough or nimble enough for the gig economy?
Well, it's still very much developing, so it remains to be seen where it's heading over the next couple of years. But I'd say overall, what we really believe in is that the regulation needs to be actually inclusive. It needs to be such that everybody who wants to drive should have the possibility to make a living on these platforms, whether they're a courier or a driver. And you brought up some of these southern European countries, which I think have it completely opposite. So it's actually very restrictive. And when you look at how many jobs they're missing because of that, it's hundreds of thousands of people who could be making a living on these platforms. But since the regulatory barriers to entry are so high, most drivers can never cross it and actually get to that opportunity. So in that sense, I think most African countries, and then specifically South Africa, are doing relatively well. They still have room to improve to make the process a bit more easy for new drivers to enter. And that's something we're of course working on and trying to partner with the government and show them examples of what works, what doesn't, while of course keeping the safety bar high. So we're not saying that in any way the safety should be compromised, but the process should be as fast and as automatic as possible for new people to get driving.
Yeah. Paddy, do you think that regulation in Africa meets companies at the point of fairness for the drivers?
The point of fairness for the drivers, I think so. I mean, if we look across the African markets where we're present, I mean, you have very varying degrees of regulation. So I'd say if you look at the markets in East Africa where we're present, they have much more developed ride-hailing specific regulations. If you look at South Africa, I mean, they're developing these regulations. They're not in place. Similarly, in some of the West African markets, they're not in place. So it's very varied. I think, as Markus says, I mean, a core focus for the regulation should be around how do you make it inclusive? How do you ensure that people who have the necessary documents, you know, for example, in South Africa, we do criminal background checks that have done these kind of processes, have a professional driving license, how you can ensure that they can start earning. And I think ultimately that's the best thing for the drivers.
Yeah. And that's the thing, because how then, Takura, do you meet driver fairness and also being fair to the consumer?
So I think from a regulatory perspective, initially the challenge is that most people think it's us against them, right?
Yeah.
And that's been a big problem. What we're doing initially is putting a foot forward, is engaging on a much more open and transparent manner, so we can share how the industry works, right? What are some of the metrics, some of the KPIs that are required? On our side, we welcome regulation, but once again, as long as it's favorable for the economy as a whole, for riders, drivers, and consumers.
Yeah. All right. Just on your side, Diko, I mean, just list for us some of the challenges that girls and young women still face in the sector.
Some of the biggest, I would say, challenge is the lack of representation. Because, you know, you need to have people who look like you to inspire you, to be like, you know what, I want to be just like her one day and be in the position that, you know, this wonderful woman is in, because you resonate better that way, and you aspire, you know, better to someone who comes from the same background as you and also actually looks like you. And however, you know, with more and more companies and partnerships being formed with non-profit organizations like GirlCode, who are trying to fight the gender gap in the ICT space, we're seeing this, you know, becoming less and less of a problem. And the other thing that we're also doing as an organization is going into schools and introducing young girls to coding as well as robotics, because, you know, it needs to start from a young age, because by the time they reach varsity, then already, you know, they've got these preconceived notions that, you know, technology is not for us, we do not belong in the space. So now we are tackling them from, you know, the age of 10, teaching them coding. You know, they need to start building amazing technology and robots, and understand that they too can do what their male counterparts can do, and even do it better in some instances.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
All right. Markus, I just want to come to you quickly on that point. What advice then would you give to young girl coders, software engineers, and the like in the space?
Be more ambitious. I think there's never been a better time to start a technology company. And overall, if you look at the history of business, just a few decades ago, it was very difficult to start a company in most industries. You needed quite a bit of capital, or you needed very specific skills. And software is one of those rare places where it's actually very low barriers to entry. Anyone who has access to the internet can learn how to code. You don't need a lot of funding to build an online software product, same as I did. I mean, I was doing it from my, you know, bedroom at home when I was living with my parents as a 19-year-old kid. So, I mean, you don't need a lot of funding, you don't need a lot of skills to get started. And of course, if you get any traction and the business starts to take off, there's billions and billions of funding available to the best entrepreneurs to raise across the world. I mean, there's hundreds of investors out there looking to bet on the next unicorns, the next technology companies. So I think the opportunities are really, really great. They're better than ever. And overall, if you look at it, then the world of software is still relatively small. It's estimated there's about 25 million software developers in the world, which is actually a pretty small number, considering there's 8 billion people on the planet. So these 25 million people are the ones who build all the software all of us use, and there's a huge lack of them. So there's still millions and millions of them missing that companies like Bolt would very happily want to hire.
Yeah. And you know, Chipo, when someone has an entrepreneurial spirit, their career is more likely to be sustainable because they have that entrepreneurial drive. And on your side, from the job seekers that you get at Harambee, is it more of a hand-to-mouth situation where someone just wants food on the table, or they're actually looking for more sustainable career paths?
Ooh, I mean, I feel like that's a tricky question, just because of like the huge number of young unemployed people that we have in South Africa. So within that context, what you have is young people who want a start. Young people, because of the high levels of inequality that we have in South Africa, young South Africans can see what other people are doing, can see what other people are driving, can see what other people are eating. And so young South Africans have the same desires and ambitions in terms of their lives, of what it is that they want for themselves. And so that can sometimes lead to that kind of decision making that says, what I need to get is that fancy job, and that's the only thing that'll be good enough, as opposed to a more sort of, like you mentioned, entrepreneurial mindset that says, let me start somewhere. And so I think in our platform we have a mix, but most young people really, really want jobs. And actually one of the new areas of business that we've been growing over the last 18 months has been, how do we get more young South Africans thinking about entrepreneurship? How do we get more young South Africans having that entrepreneurial mindset? Because as you mentioned, like, not everybody needs to be an entrepreneur, but thinking like an entrepreneur can benefit anybody at every stage of their career. And it's that core thinking bit of saying, okay, how do I start where I am with what I have? And that works as well from a job perspective in terms of what could be my first job and how could I build that into something that's more lucrative, or to say, hey, if I just have myself and like 100 Rand, can I buy a packet of sweets and start a small spaza shop just outside my house and see where that takes me? So I think that's something that we're really passionate about driving, but we also have the cognizance that like the level of need and the level of inequality in our country makes it difficult for young people to be able to think in those terms.
Yeah, and just sticking with you, Chipo, I mean, how are you, because you look at the population dynamics and the youth demographic is growing. So how are you building your models to speak to that?
I mean, well, if this was a traditional panel, I have like my one favorite slide that I like to use, but I'll describe it to you guys. But basically, one of the things that's so interesting about Africa right now is that by 2100, Africa will have over 40% of the world's working age population. And this is a really interesting statistic to think about, because in China's sort of like peak of production and as the major factory of the world, China was at a little bit over 20% of the world's working age population. And you're going to have double of that in Africa over the next 80 years. And so for us, then the question becomes, how do you plan for a future? Because if you're not planning for how young Africans are going to get to work, what you're saying is most of the world won't have work, pretty much. So how do we plan and build systems that are cognizant of some of the barriers and the deficits that young Africans face in terms of an access to education, access to electricity, access to basic infrastructure, but also an awareness that we need to figure out those core problems in order to develop the kind of systems that can have a functioning global economy. And I think that's something that we are, in true Harambee terminology, scarce-sighted about, because it's a little bit terrifying if we don't get it right.
Yeah.
But there's also so much potential and excitement if we can figure out how to work that out.
Yeah, all right. I am cognizant of time because we have 15 minutes for a question and answer session, but just last questions for Takura and Paddy. Paddy, for Bolt, where are you pinpointing growth for the African continent?
Sure. I mean, we're in 7 countries in Africa at the moment. We've recently passed the 1 billion rides mark in these 7 countries. So we've now done over 1 billion rides. So we've seen very good traction, I think, in Africa so far. Africa also makes up a very important part of Bolt's business overall. I mean, almost half of our users are in Africa. So it's a very important part of our business. But I think we're still just scratching the surface, obviously. I mean, 7 countries out of such a big continent is a fairly small footprint. We see lots of potential for further geographical expansion. We see, as I mentioned earlier, potential for further vertical expansion. I mean, ride-hailing is the bulk of the business here. Food delivery is fairly recently launched, but we see further growth opportunities there. And then on the micromobility side, I mean, I think the opportunities in the short term are still fairly small, but they are there, and we'd very much love to work with cities to help scale that up in the longer term. And then I think to your point, I mean, if you look at the sort of the demographics and the sort of macro drivers for our business, so, you know, things like urbanization, smartphone penetration, all of these things are moving in the right direction at very rapid speed within Africa. So long term, we see huge growth potential on the continent.
Yeah, all right. And just lastly, before we get to closing remarks from you, Takura, how are you approaching Bolt having systems that speak to making the app simpler? Of course, right now, the main unit is still the e-hailing ride unit, but obviously because of some of the growth metrics that we're expecting to see, at some point, Bolt does want this to be considered a super app in Africa. So how are you approaching that, making that technology simple and easy to use for the consumer?
I would say the one word is probably innovation. From that perspective, the way we look at it is getting customer feedback, right? So we get feedback from our customers through customer support and through the app. We also conduct extensive internal research with riders and drivers, and with the main goal of improving the product on the app, right? Improving the features to make sure that it's more usable for the end consumer. We've also launched more accessible products, one of them being the web portal, where you don't actually need to have a phone or a phone that can download apps for you to request a ride. So we've managed to see quite strong growth in that in South Africa, just due to that discrepancy between smartphone penetration and those who don't have.
Yeah, all right. Well, let's get to closing remarks before we get to the question and answer session from both our audience that is here physically and also online. So this is a 30-second elevator pitch on just what you'd like us to take away from this panel, Markus.
Overall, Bolt has done a tremendous journey in Africa so far. We've just crossed 1 billion trips, which is a massive milestone if you think about it. There's not that many products that are ever going to be used 1 billion times, and then we've already made it here. But again, as mentioned, we're just at the early days. So when we think ahead over the next couple of decades, what's the potential? It's absolutely massive. Africa has the fastest growing population in the world. It's the fastest growing urbanization rate. All of these people need to move. And we think Bolt can play a really crucial role in that, supporting public transport, acting in partnership with it, and enabling millions of people to get to work, get to school, wherever they need to go at affordable rates. And the very last bit is that, again, what's also a bit of a new thing for us is that we started off focusing on the consumer, and we're today the most popular ride-hailing company across Africa. But there's also a huge segment of businesses. So maybe that's the last thought I'd leave you with, that's something that's an increasing focus for us for the next couple of years as well, to make sure that companies can make sure their employees travel safely and affordably wherever they need to go.
All right, so really speaking to our topic today, that if you didn't get it, is titled Building Better Cities with Bolt in partnership with Business Day Dialogues. Takura, on your side, closing remarks?
Yeah, I think the impact of Bolt in Africa, and specifically in South Africa, is heavily understated, right? Considering South Africa, our economy and the challenge that we have, unemployment at around 35%, we have a direct impact on that in two ways. One of them is that we employ people in South Africa, almost 200 people across marketing, PR, customer support, strategy, and operations. And this customer support doesn't include the outsourced partners that we do have. So we're making a massive impact there as well. And then from an earnings opportunities, we have over 40,000 drivers on the platform who are choosing to make an earning on Bolt. And what this means is when you compare it to other organizations in the country, this is as big as some mining houses. So the impact there is massive, and we're looking to grow. Whereas other people are scaling back, we're doubling down and looking for growth. So we're looking forward to working in the markets.
All right. And on your side, Tinyiko, on tech innovation and the role that young women and girls are playing?
Technology is very vast, and there are a lot of opportunities out there for you. And I think young girls and women should take up these opportunities and take up the space, and also understand that you can be anything that you want to be, and you are capable of anything. And the future is, of course, female. Thank you.
All right, and lastly, Chipo.
Yeah, I mean, I think for us as an organization, we are passionate about a growing South African economy that's powered by the talent and the skills of young people. And part of what we need to make that happen is partnership with amazing organizations and corporations like Bolt. And so that's what we're here to do. We're here to partner with anybody who wants to get young people employed and figure out ways to do this more effectively across the country.
All right, well, thank you very much to all of you. So let's get to the question and answer session. Quite a lot of questions that we have gotten here. So the first one, what CSI projects is Bolt doing for the people of South Africa? I guess I should direct that to you, Takura.
Yeah, so one of our key strategic pillars this year is to support more from a CSI perspective. And this is obviously overreaching across the organization. We do have agendas such as Women in Tech, but more specifically in South Africa, last year we partnered with a local startup called Cello. What they do is that they link funders to underprivileged schools where they can get funding and support for some of the initiatives. So last year we supported a girls-only school, and we provided access to internet, screens for computer use, etc. So that was a big sort of stepping stone for us going in that direction.
All right. Let's get to more of your questions. With so many e-hailing apps in the country, why are you still signing drivers? Can the app not cap drivers to ensure that drivers make a decent amount of money?
So how the industry works is every year it grows. So there are more riders wanting to use the service. As a result, you need more drivers to provide that service. Currently, when you look at it, we have we have millions of trips that go unserviced every month. And that for us is demand that we can't tap. It's unsatisfied customers. It's missed earnings opportunities for other people who could be on the platform capturing that demand. So I think it's a bit of a misnomer to say that we've reached saturation. We definitely have not. As we see the global trends moving across, people are moving away from an ownership model. It's more of, I don't need to own a car. I can sell my car and rely on e-hailing. And as that trend moves across, there's going to be more and more people who require safe, affordable, and reliable transport. We need to be able to provide that service. Hence, we're continually adding drivers.
All right. Let me direct this question to you, Paddy. With Bolt being an international company, are you investing in talent in your local markets?
Absolutely. So, I mean, as Takura mentioned, I think on the African continent, we currently employ over 600 people. We have close to 200 people here in South Africa on the ground. We have a regional hub for Africa and the Middle East in Nairobi, where I'm based. So we have a big local presence, and I think that's been one of the key success factors for Bolt, is we have this very strong local teams that have good local understanding. And then at a global level, I mean, we have a lot of development programs, coaching programs for our talent. We have the program that Takura mentioned, Women in Tech, where we take on female interns from university, get them into Bolt. Many of them end up then working full-time at Bolt afterwards. So it's something we take very seriously, and we're very aware that this is, as I say, one of the key success factors for us on the continent.
An interesting one here. Please do not forget that senior citizens also use this mode of transport. How are you catering to that kind of consumer, Markus?
Well, there's a lot of different segments of consumers that we try to support, and that's still very much a work in progress of us reaching all of them. Of course, we have elderly people, disabled people, people with kids, people with pets. So there's a lot of different segments we want to cover, and that's something that, of course, we continuously work on. And whenever we see there's an opportunity in a particular city to launch one of these products, then we will.
All right. I'm actually reading this, and Paddy, you spoke about it earlier. Using Bolt overseas is always a nice experience in terms of how many options exist. For example, some countries have scooter and bodas.
That's the motorbikes.
Okay, and rentals. Can we expect to see different verticals in South Africa? I guess you did say, but it's not a very mature growth area at this point. So when can you start expecting meaningful movement?
So the Buddhas, that's the motorbike taxis in East Africa. So that's a bit of a different thing. So I mean, I think, again, talking about sort of success factors for us on the continent, I think we've been very good at integrating other modes of transport that are already quite prevalent in the cities. So, for example, in Nairobi or Dar es Salaam, motorbike taxis are very common, and so they make up a big share of our business. Similarly, we work with three-wheelers, tuk-tuks in East Africa and some of the West African markets. And I mean, it is something we've been discussing, whether there could be opportunities to do similar kind of thing in South Africa, but it's just obviously not as common a form of transport at the moment. Then when it comes to our other modes of transport, I mean, globally our vision is to try and reduce private car ownership and free up space in cities. And so these electric micromobility vehicles, they're a really important part of that strategy, because we know that there are these short trips where it doesn't make sense to do it in a car. If it's electric, it's much more sustainable. And so, as you mentioned, in Europe, that's really playing out for us at scale. In Africa, I think there is dependency around the infrastructure. There's obviously dependency on the electricity grid. There's these kind of things, but we do see opportunities in certain parts of South Africa, certain parts of Kenya in the short term, and then long term. I mean, we really want to work with cities to help sort of develop out this infrastructure so it can become a more viable mode of transport.
All right. I did mention this, the conflict between the meter taxi drivers and e-hailing drivers. In the past, minibus taxis and meter taxis have been quite angry that you are taking their clients. Do you see yourself as competitors to these services? And I guess what I'd also like to add from there is that, are you seeing a migration from meter taxis in terms of drivers to Bolt?
So from a competition perspective, we definitely do not compete. I think they have a separate price point to us, and they have a separate strategy when you look at pick-up and drop-off. We see ourselves as a complementary service in the ecosystem for transportation in South Africa. So there's e-hailing, there's bus, there's trains, there's meter taxis, and there's us. We initially, from what we see from our current rider bases, they're actually taking e-hailing to get to the taxis, or to the taxis off to their homes. So there is some slight overlap, but due to their price point, it's very difficult for us to then say we're competing or trying to take their clients.
All right. This is for Chipo and Tinyiko. I'd like to find out from them, do you feel that women in South Africa are given a seat at the table? Tinyiko?
Yes and no. However, what we've seen is that more and more women are making a seat at that table. And that is the important thing as well, is that it's not only up to other people, but women in South Africa themselves. And we've seen them step up a lot. And yeah.
I mean, I think it's a really interesting question given like South Africa's politics and context. And what we see particularly for young work seekers in our case is that like women disproportionately are given the short end of the stick in terms of wages, for even for entry-level opportunities at the same point, in terms of some of the challenges that they face with gender-based violence in terms of in the job-seeking process. And so for us as an organization, part of what we're doing is to have quite an explicit focus on supporting young women. Young women make up over 63% of our network, and we try to think about, if young people need jobs, what are the barriers that stand in the way? And what are the barriers that are particular to the experiences that young women have? And that's how we're trying to make sure that more young women are entering the system and will be able to have a more meaningful seat at the table as they go on in their careers.
Yeah. Takura, there's a question here on the meter taxis. Does Bolt suffer from the taxi industry not allowing pickup near, for example, train stations where you maybe feel like they're taking your lunch because they see that as their territory?
So we work in an open market, right? We do have challenges around safety and violence towards our drivers. But what we are doing is actively working with the local police to support the driver community. We do share what we see as sort of hotspots. It's not just the train station. It's certain malls, at times even at the airport. But once again, the idea there, or the perception, is that they're taking from them, which is not the case, right? It's a complementary service, and to be fair and to be honest, we can all exist in this ecosystem, right? I think it's almost like saying at some point e-hailing will take customers from trains. That'll never happen, right? We just need to sort of find a way to cohabitate.
I guess this may be last one from the online space. We will be taking some from our physical audience as well. Speaks to the BQS system that you were talking about. How do you manage the unprofessional behavior of drivers who are rude, don't have working air conditioners, and expect customers to take rides of over 50 kilometers with windows open all the way?
Yeah. So once again, that is a customer service issue.
Yeah.
BQS is built to address and drive those specific challenges.
Yeah.
So we do encourage riders to provide feedback on the app, right? And that feedback will flow directly onto the driver. What we are looking as time progresses is continually tightening those requirements for BQS to ensure that our quality bar keeps on increasing and increasing. As I mentioned earlier, we moved from a point where we now have 90% of our trips getting 5-star rating, right? But we want to get to 100%. So how do we do that? It's really about sort of tightening in the education around the BQS system.
All right. Well, that's all we have from the online audience. Are there any questions in-house?
Yes, thank you. I think I'll open this question to the entire panel. I think globally we've seen that in tech there is quite a low barrier to entry even for women. Like you mentioned that you just have to get started. So why is it that on the African continent the barriers seem to be higher, or do you see that changing? For example, Tinyiko mentioned that she works with people from university, so girls in IT that have graduated, Bold Women in Tech is for graduates. So I think that's already quite a high level barrier already in the African context, whereas globally we're seeing a lot of companies not even requiring degrees and pipelining people into their companies, just giving them the skills and take them on. So is that something that is coming for the African continent? Do you see that happening? I think Chipo, so maybe you can answer that.
Okay, I mean, I'll take the first stab at what you said that really resonated with me and with us as an organization, is that like part of what we work with corporate partners is to understand what do you really need for somebody to be able to do a job effectively. And so historically, a university degree was used as a qualification that people say, if they've got a university degree, they can do this job. But what we've learned over like the 10 years that we've been operating is that actually a lot of those barriers are really artificial, and you can have better sort of like testing and better metrics to understand what can help young people actually be successful in their jobs. And so for us as an organization, part of what we see our work is to do is to partner with corporations to say, let's sit down, let's talk about your entry-level positions, let's talk about what are the skills that you're actually looking for, and how can we find alternative proxies that don't have as high barriers to entry to get young people into that. And that's work that we've seen happen in quite a number of sectors. We've seen it quite successful in the global business services area around call centers. That's where we've had a lot of traction with this idea of more inclusive hiring that has less of those barriers, and it's something that we're continuing to work with across other industries as well.
Right, any other questions? There were quite a lot of questions from our online audience, so I can understand if everything's already been answered. Any more questions? All right.
There's one.
There's one.
Oh, there's, okay.
Thanks. In your quest, in terms of accessing cities and working with cities, what are the bottlenecks? And in terms of the public sector, I heard that there are challenges in terms of partnerships. What are the bottlenecks there as well? So with Bolt,
yep.
I know that as an example, City of Johannesburg is launching Smart City.
Yep.
A smart city app, and they want the city to be smart. What are your challenges in accessing municipalities and cities in terms of partnering with them?
Sure. So I mean, we have a public policy team. I think it's about 4 people in house across Africa, and these are the conversations they're constantly having. Is one, I mean, at a regulatory level, how we can partner to have, I mean, more inclusive but also higher standards for safety integrated in the regulation. But then also to your point around cities specifically, I mean, so for example, on the micromobility side, I mean, it needs fairly like flat roads, good road infrastructure. You need places where you have reliable electricity to charge the vehicles. And these are very much things we're talking to mayors and to cities about. We'll be in Nairobi later this week, and we're meeting the mayor of Nairobi, and this is one of the conversations that's going to be happening. Because, I mean, they've banned motorbikes, these Buddhas from the CBD, and they're also trying to understand how could they better design the CBD and free it up for more people-centered sort of mobility. And so in these kind of conversations, this is where we want to be able to try and steer a little bit and see, show good examples from some of the European cities where we do have this micromobility and multi-vertical presence.
All right. There's one more question there.
I know we're talking about building better cities, but do you see Bolt moving into your tier 2? Often, we're very fortunate, we live in a big city, and you go onto your app and you click and you get your transport arrives. And then suddenly you go somewhere maybe on holiday, or you go to a meeting in a tier 2 city, and you just take it for granted that you're going to be able to push your button and be able to get your transport, and you suddenly realize there are no vehicles.
So very much so. I think this has been another key part of Bolt's strategy in Africa. One has been to have good local teams that understand the markets, but the other has been, when we're in a country, we want to go deep. We don't just want to be in the capital city. We believe there's a lot of value in going to smaller cities. So I think in South Africa, we're in close to 30 cities. In Nigeria, I think it's close to 40 cities. And so we really are trying to build out that presence. And going back to what we were talking about earlier, that also means sometimes working with other modes of transport. So, for example, in East Africa, we see that cars, in some of the smaller cities, cars are a less viable means of transport, but 2- and 3-wheelers make a lot of sense. So there we really focus on scaling those up to try and better cater to each city's needs, basically.
I must tell you, I was very impressed last year when I was able to take a Bolt from Sun City to Sandton, provinces. You can even get a Bolt from here to Harties, so just some extra information. I think there was another question there.
Hi everyone, thanks so much for the presentation. I wanted to kind of double click on the idea of how you service the different segments of the market. Pet owners was really interesting to me. So I'd like to hear about the future of the platform. Are you guys thinking about that more as a feature development thing, or more as a complete product development situation?
So I think there is, the way we think about it, we have different categories depending on often the vehicle type. So for example, in South Africa, you'll see our XL for the big cars. We have a premium for the high-end vehicles. We have a base category and an economy category, and they're quite differentiated based. Normally, it's based on vehicle and on price point as a result. But we do see that there's a lot of value for other types of add-ons. So if you say something like pets, where the driver's willing to have pets in the vehicle. Similarly for children, so where the drivers have children's car seats in the car. And so we have these in a number of cities already. And they're quite niche use cases, but they add a lot of value to the platform and to users that sometimes are currently excluded because we don't offer that. So we very much want to add more of those type of add-ons to our platform. And similarly, within the categories, we're also looking at other types of use cases. So Takura mentioned the women-only category. We know that's an important use case to address safety concerns, both on the female driver side, but at the female rider side. Similarly, in our push to drive electrification across our platform, we have green categories in a number of our cities. So in Nairobi, that was the first African city where we launched a green category, where we have EVs and hybrids, and riders that would rather use those can choose to select that category specifically.
All right, any more questions? All right, I think that's it. All right, so thank you very much to everybody for joining us, our audience that is here physically with us and also online. Thank you very much for the questions. I think this has been a long overdue conversation. Of course, I did mention earlier on that e-hailing services have really changed how we commute and how we see the public transport system. So it's going to be quite interesting to see the growth levers that Bolt uses in Africa in terms of it being seen as a super app, also EV penetration and how infrastructure supports that, and obviously safety being a very big issue. Good to see that there are some developments there that are enabling a safer environment and a fairer environment for drivers and also for consumers in every demographic. Also good to know the strides that GirlCode, organizations such as GirlCode are making in terms of including women and young girls in that tech space, because we do know that the more women build things, the more they are involved in the creation of things, the more those things are built to cater for women and their safety. And also good to know that Bolt does work with NPOs such as Harambee to solve the unemployment crisis that we have in South Africa, and hopefully we can get to a point where the gig economy is considered a serious earnings metric there for young people. Thank you very much to my panelists. So of course, Markus Villig, the global CEO of Bolt, and also Paddy Partridge, Vice President for Ride Hailing at Bolt, Takura Malaba, Regional Manager for Ride Hailing in South Africa and East Africa for Bolt, Tinyiko Simbine, Co-founder and CFO of GirlCode, and also Nchimunya, more affectionately known as Chipo, Hamukoma, Head of Funder Relationships and Strategic Projects at Harambee. I'd like to thank all the guests, as I mentioned, in-house and also online. Thank you to my speakers here for your participation, and Markus for coming all the way from Europe to South Africa, and to you, Paddy, as well, and to you guys from your respective homes in South Africa. We do appreciate that in all the load shedding and the rain. And also, we'd really like to thank Bolt for partnering with the Business Day Dialogues Live. Of course, this panel was titled Building Better Cities with Bolt in partnership with Business Day Dialogues Live. Thank you very much, everybody, and do get those Valentine's gifts for tomorrow. You're running out of time. Thank you.
Thank you.
My name is Tabo. My friends call me Tibos, some call me Tibobo. I've been driving with Bolt since 2016. I love my wife, my children, they keep me going. And I do what I do with Bolt because of them. My first month was like awesome, because when I saw my earnings, I was like, wow, is this really me that is earning such amount of money? I mean, I couldn't believe it. The second or the third month when I made on about 40,000 a month, it was just marvelous. It was just so amazing. First major expense that I settled working with Bolt is basically my car installment. Bolt helps me to pay for this car. Advice that I can give to people that are now in the platform with Bolt is follow the guidelines that are given to you by Bolt. You're gonna make money.